Next item on the order paper is a motion on baby loss certificate scheme and pathology service. I'll ask the clerk to read the motion.
That this Assembly acknowledges the grief, pain and trauma caused by the loss of a baby during pregnancy, recognises that the trauma felt is exacerbated by bereaved parents having to travel to England for post-mortem due to the absence of a local perinatal and paediatric pathologist. Further recognises the potential of an all-island paediatric pathology service so bereaved parents can access post-mortems on the island of Ireland. Believes parents should have the option to have their child's memory recorded with an official certificate free of charge, and calls on the Minister of Finance to develop a baby loss certificate scheme for those parents that have lost a baby during pregnancy before 24 weeks.
The Committee has agreed to allow up to 1 hour 30 minutes for this debate. The proposer of the motion will have 10 minutes to propose and 10 minutes to wind. As an amendment has been selected and published in the Marshall list, the Business Committee has agreed that 15 minutes will be added to the total time for the debate. Please open the debate on the motion.
Gura Mayogat can call you. Baby Robin Elizabeth Purvis, born sleeping on 21st of April 2023 at just under 17 weeks gestation. A date that will be etched in the hearts and minds of her mum and dad, and indeed her whole family, who still and always will grieve the immense loss of baby Robin, particularly as they approach her first anniversary this day week. Robin's parents, like thousands of families across the north who have been impacted by baby loss, had begun to plan for the arrival of their beloved baby. From the very first day that pregnancy was confirmed, the excitement of a new baby coming gave them so much joy and happiness. And pregnancy can be a very exciting time for expectant parents as they build their hopes and dreams for their child, who he or she will look like, and the joy that baby will bring to their lives. But it can also be a time of worry, and as a mummy to 2 boys myself, I know too well the feelings of anxiety in anticipation of every checkup and every scan appointment through your pregnancy, yearning for the regular reassurance that your baby is doing well and is safe and healthy. So to be given that earth-shattering news during pregnancy that your baby has sadly passed away is the worst news imaginable for many parents. The devastating loss of a baby during pregnancy is too often overlooked and treated as taboo in our society, with many parents suffering the tragedy alone and feeling that no one will understand the depth of their loss. The heartbreak of losing a baby is a reality that touches the lives of countless families around us. Today, we in this chamber can take a positive and progressive step forward by officially recognising this loss, by committing to deliver a baby loss certificate scheme for parents who lose a child before 24 weeks of pregnancy. By introducing this scheme, we can send a very clear message to the parents who have suffered pregnancy loss, that your baby existed, that your love was real, that your grief is valid, and that you are not alone. This certificate is not just ink on paper. It is a testament to the love that was felt, the dreams that were woven, and the hopes that were held for a precious life cut short. It is a symbol of acknowledgement and remembrance. And I want to take this opportunity today to read to you some of the courageous but heart-wrenching testimonies that were submitted to a survey that my party conducted from over 4,000 parents. I lost my baby at 14 weeks. I just had the operation and we were sent home from hospital with nothing but a broken heart. Another lady who had multiple losses said, "My heart, hopes and dreams for my babies are still shattered." Another said, "Until you have had this experience, you will never understand how devastating it is." And one dad described how the pain never really goes away, saying, "We can still remember the feeling of loss we felt at the time, over 30 years ago." Today, we have an opportunity to do the right thing by these parents and to put our arms around those who carry this grief by bringing the introduction of the baby loss certificate a step closer. Pregnancy loss affects approximately 1 in 4 pregnancies, and sadly, where this loss occurs prior to 24 weeks, the lack of support and acknowledgement for that baby and their families is stark. What we have heard loud and clear from everyone who has kindly shared their story and experience of baby loss, and from those health professionals and organisations who provide support to families following the loss of a child at all stages of pregnancy, is that we need to do more. And whilst I recognise that everyone deals with their grief differently, it is very evident that a baby loss certificate would go some way to providing many families with comfort as they deal with their loss. However, there's so much more we can do, and I want to commend both my colleagues, the Finance Minister Ciara Archibald, who has committed to work towards the delivery of this scheme, and the Economy Minister Conor Murphy, who's currently working to expand parental bereavement leave to include those who have lost a baby prior to 24 weeks. Pregnancy and baby loss can be a complex and multifaceted issue, and it is evident that there is no one-size-fits-all when tailoring support for families impacted. Therefore, we must ensure that any scheme brought forward is easily accessed by those in need, so as to not create any additional stress or suffering during what is an already very traumatic time for them. We have some fantastic organisations across the North who are providing invaluable support to families through their loss. Cradle, Little Forget-Me-Nots, Aching Arms and Tiny Life, just to name a few. And these organisations bring a wealth of experience and expertise to help us as policymakers develop the compassionate care and support that bereaved parents need and deserve, regardless of the timing of their loss. And collectively, they have emphasised just how significant the implementation of a baby loss certificate scheme would be to recognise the loss for families and facilitate the grieving process. So, members, today, let us hear the voices of every mum and dad who have suffered the loss of a baby during pregnancy, and let's commit ourselves to working together across all party lines to deliver this baby loss certificate scheme. Gara mai agad.
I call Alan Robinson to move the amendment. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The continued absence of a local perinatal and paediatric pathology service is extremely disappointing, and there is no doubt that it places an additional burden on bereaved parents at a devastating time in their lives. It should not be in the case that a mother faces a stark choice between accompanying their baby to another part of the United Kingdom for a post-mortem, with all the upheaval that causes, or being separated from them at a time of immense grief. My party believes the Department should continue to pursue all options to reinstate a regional service in Northern Ireland. Our citizens deserve to have timely and reliable access to this provision in their own communities and familiar surroundings within our NHS and in close proximity to vital support networks of friends and family, which is incredibly important. And that does not mean we oppose greater cross-border cooperation in this area. The problems in terms of training, recruitment and staffing shortages are shared throughout the British Isles and internationally. Finding common solutions which allow both of our jurisdictions to attract, retain and perhaps share skills and expertise will go a long way to supporting a long-term answer to these issues. There needs to be a recognition that the scarcity of skilled health professionals remains a key obstacle to either restoration of a dedicated service in our province or the concept of an all-Ireland network service for perinatal and pathology services. It is our understanding that prior to the loss of the Belfast Trust service, contact was made with the Irish authorities to examine the feasibility of providing an in-reach service in Northern Ireland. At that point in time, that was not deemed viable due to capacity constraints. There has been little evidence to date that that position has changed. In light of this, it is crucial that we do not raise false expectations as to the likelihood of a cross-border service, particularly in the short term. It would be wrong to go down that route only to have it emerge that the current skills and infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland do not have the headroom to absorb the increased demand. In such a case, we could be in a situation where bereaved parents face broadly similar wait times to those experienced presently. Therefore, whilst we agree that this must be a priority for the Department going forward, it is also a time for a careful and evidence-based approach. No option should be off the table. However, parental choice on whether to access this service, wherever it resides, must be respected in all scenarios. It certainly will be helpful as well if the Health Minister at some point, through ministerial questions or whatever, can answer a number of points. Is there still an open-ended or rolling recruitment process ongoing in this field? How many consultant posts in this field have been recruited successfully in GB or the Irish Republic in the same period? Is feedback from parents, staff, funeral directors who have been used or work as part of the interim pathology service in Órlaithí still being captured? What action has been taken on the back of that? What proportion of parents chose not to accompany their baby? How does that square with rates prior to the loss of the regional service in 2019? And lastly, have wait times for post-mortems and turnaround times for results improved since 2019? And how does that trajectory compare with outcomes in the Irish Republic? Regarding the second element of this motion, my party supports a baby loss certificate scheme. It is a matter of profound sensitivity and importance, the recognition of the loss of a baby, no matter how or how early it occurs. The introduction of a baby loss certificate in Northern Ireland is not just about a document. It is about acknowledgement, compassion and support for those who have endured the unimaginable. The loss of a child before 24 weeks is a silent sorrow that many parents carry without the solace of formal recognition. While England has taken steps to offer a voluntary baby loss certificate, and other parts of the UK are facing a lobby to provide same, Northern Ireland has yet to implement this compassionate measure. This certificate would be a symbol, a tangible expression of the loss parents feel. It says to the grieving, your loss is real, your baby's existence was significant, and your pain is acknowledged by society. It is a step towards healing, a gesture that can provide comfort during a time of indescribable pain. Implementing the baby loss certificate scheme is not about bureaucracy, it's about humanity. It is about standing with those who feel invisible in their grief and saying, we see you, we honour your child, and we are listening to you. This place is back with a lot of hope and a lot of fanfare. So, let us be the voice for the voiceless. Let us bring this change to Northern Ireland, because every precious life, no matter how brief, leaves an imprint on this world, and it deserves to be remembered.
Kelly Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can I just start off by saying to anyone who has undergone a loss in pregnancy at birth or just after their baby has been born that I'm very sorry. It is a grief that is very hard to bear, and I thank Mr. Robinson for the words that he's just said. It hit home to me. You'll understand in a moment. I've spoken in this house before about being a parent who has lost multiple babies during pregnancy. I'll not talk today about the pathology service because I never got that far. Whenever of my 14 pregnancies, the 13 that didn't live, we never had the opportunity to have their remains checked out because I lost my children before 24 weeks. At the time you leave the hospital, if you're lucky to go to the hospital, or you're at home and you maybe have a visit with the GP, and that's it, it's over. Empty arms, and I know the organisation very well, explains exactly how empty you feel afterwards, and the fact that we have no recognition of our children hurts, and it hurts really hard. What I would say is that the new scheme that's been brought in by the UK government is very, very welcome. It's part of their women's health strategy. It's designed to put a greater focus on women's specific health conditions, including fertility and pregnancy loss. And it thinks about gynae conditions such as endometriosis, but the scheme will help women like me who have experienced miscarriage and have nothing other than either a positive pregnancy test on your medical record and then followed up by a negative pregnancy test. At times you might have the word miscarriage used, and that's it. All my hopes and dreams for each one of those children live with me and only with me. There is no formal recognition of them. I don't have a grave. I never had a wake. I never had a funeral. And that's why it's very important to me and very personal to me that we bring forward this scheme. But I will say to you, Minister, please don't do what England has done and cut it off at 2018. I lost my first in 1996. I was married 6 months, and boy was that a shock to the system. I didn't know anybody else who'd gone through it. That baby sits here every single day. And the other subsequent babies sit here every single day. But I stand, there's an annual service of remembrance that happens. We take it year about, and there's one up in Derry, but there's one in St Anne's Cathedral and St Peter's Cathedral in Belfast, and I stand beside women in their 80s, daddies in their 70s, people in their 50s like me, couples maybe who are in their early 20s, all with the tears tripping them, remembering in the one place, in the one space that we can all come together to remember our children. We take flowers to the front of the church, and the place is a mound of flowers. The smell of flowers is very strong. But to think that we have the opportunity for a certificate, but for that to be cut off at 2018 is very difficult for me. To have a certificate, I don't care, I'll print it myself. As long as I can have something tangible, a piece of paper that says one of my Armstrongs was here, even for a very short time, is so important. Please don't take that away from an 80-year-old. Please don't take that away from a 60-year-old. Or please don't take that away from somebody in their 50s like me. Let's do something really positive, really helpful for all those parents out there. And I thank the Minister and the Executive for even thinking about taking this forward, because it's such a taboo thing that nobody wants to talk about it. This is something special that this House can do. This is something special that I will hold very dear if we can make this happen. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. I call Robbie Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I feel wholly inadequate in following the member from Strangford, Kelly. Thank you so much for sharing such a personal testimony. I'm going to read from a script, but many of you will know that I'm passionate about the rights of children and young people, and that extends right into the protections of pre-birth and how we recognise and value every single life. And Kelly, through the Speaker, thank you so much. I mean, there perhaps may not be a speech, and there may be a speech today that reaches into our hearts, but I would say to the members that are here today, we obviously have an amendment, and whilst the amendment is okay, and to some it may add some value, I would ask that we don't divide on this, and we regardless of the benefit of the amendment and the motion, I think they both have value. I think we can do better than that when we come to the vote. But thank you, Kelly. There really will be few topics that we share and talk about in this chamber that will bring such emotion and should evoke such passion in all of us. The loss of a child at any age can be one of the most devastating things that can happen to a family. I think of my own granny on my mum's side who had 16 children, and 11 of them survived her, 5 didn't. And would have dearly loved to have had a facility to have them recognised in that manner that we're talking about today. My heart goes out to each and every woman, man and family that's affected in this manner. That's why I very much welcome the recent introduction of the pre-24-week baby loss certificate in England, Mr. Speaker. And as we know, they were introduced there following a recommendation by the Independent Pregnancy Loss Review commissioned by our Westminster Government. But pregnancy loss is no different there than it is here, and so I think it's only sensible that the relevant departments here engage with their counterparts in England with a view to assessing and hopefully improving on what could be implemented here in Northern Ireland. On that topic, I welcome the early clarity from both the Minister for Finance and the Minister for Health locally that their officials are working collaboratively on that issue. And it has been mentioned, in relation to the paediatric pathology, I'm sure we are all equally as concerned whenever the announcement was made in 2018 that post-mortem examinations of babies and children from Northern Ireland were to be moved to Liverpool. And as I've said, the loss of a child is absolutely devastating. And whilst few things could possibly be worse, what compounds the situation locally is the subsequent realisation for parents that their little one has to be flown to England for the necessary examination. And at that moment, the last thing that parents will want to do is to get on a flight, perhaps leave behind a wider family supporting network. And this can compound their grief, and quite frankly is a cruel position to ask any grieving parent to put themselves in. And that's exactly what's happening here at the moment. And whilst I would love it, I really would, if Northern Ireland were to have its own standalone paediatric or perinatal pathology service, we need to remember why it was lost in the first place. It wasn't because it had been determined that it was the right thing to do. It was because of the size and scale of Northern Ireland, and thankfully our low numbers of babies and children passing away, and that is not to take away from the pain that each of those deaths will have. As such, it was just a very difficult service to retain the sufficient level of staffing. So following the resignation of the sole paediatric pathologist at the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust, significant efforts were made to retain the service here within Northern Ireland, including, I believe, repeated recruitment drives both nationally and internationally. Those attempts ultimately were unsuccessful and resulted in the service being provided from Liverpool. And whilst I hope, as I've stated, that the House doesn't divide at any point in this motion, I would say to the proposers of the amendment that my party would absolutely prefer to see a cross-border dimension to this service rather than what we have at the moment and leave it to the status quo. Because as difficult as it may be supporting families wherever they travel, whether that be Dublin or Liverpool, it's bound to be easier not to have to get on to a plane and travel. I recognise, however, that even with the feasibility of an all-island approach, and we've discussed that already, such a service would still take time, especially due to the time required for new trainees and specialisms in this area. It's also my preferred outcome that the reinstatement of the standalone Northern Ireland service would be something that we could proactively and pragmatically seek to do. Mr. Speaker, the current situation of having to choose between flying to England or letting the remains of a little one travel alone is cruel. And whilst it was rolled out a number of years ago, we now have a momentum through this brave motion to address that. I hope today's debate will focus minds and act as a driver for the current position that many families sadly find themselves in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Call Mark Durkin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Baby loss is a topic that's often met with silence, yet it affects countless families across the north and a number in this chamber. Some here have been very brave and spoken out about it. Others have not spoken. It doesn't make them any less brave, but I acknowledge your loss. In my years campaigning for improvements in paediatric pathology and early baby loss, I've met with hundreds of parents who felt their loss or the topic of miscarriage remained taboo, hushed. While their experiences and views all different, all of those that I've spoken to recognise the value in a certification scheme. Losing a child is a pain that no parent should ever have to endure, and it's important to note the level of grief is not determined by length of pregnancy, and nor should official recognition be. For so many, the first glimpse of those blue lines symbolises the beginnings of life, a child for whom they see a future, who they tell their loved ones about. Yet 1 in 4 families will lose a baby and not have that loss recognised beyond the confines of the hospital walls. It's my hope that in us speaking here today, we can help erode that stigma that still does exist and encourage others to speak more openly about their own experiences. I'd like to share a few words from parents who reached out to me on what a certificate scheme would mean to them. One mother said, "It would mean my little one existed. It would provide proof to the outside world." Another said, "I lost babies whose names I'd chosen, who I'd hoped for so long. Having tangible recognition would provide some comfort to me and others in my position." I want to thank those parents for entrusting me with their stories, and for the wonderful organisations like Sandsy and I who offer a glimmer of hope in the darkest of times. This recognition would provide an acknowledgement of the significance of these precious lives and would honour the grief of the families who mourn them. But our work doesn't stop there. Alongside the implementation of an early baby loss certificate scheme, we recognise the pressing need to improve perinatal and paediatric pathology services. Too often, families are left waiting for answers, for closure, for the chance to understand what happened to their baby, and this is totally unacceptable. Since 2019, these post-mortem examinations have had to be carried out in England due to a lack of specialist staff, so we certainly support the amendment, and I think everyone here will. But it should never have reached this point. 5 years ago, I'd received assurances from the then Health Permanent Secretary that work was underway to seek a cross-border solution, and it's just unforgivable that to date there's been no progress on that. Certainly.
And speaking so eloquently about baby loss and miscarriage, and I recently spoke with an inspiring lady in my office who had experienced a miscarriage and had no bereavement support midwife or specialist counselling service offered to her. Does the member agree with me? This is absolutely unacceptable, and we must do everything within our power to change this, to support these women and others.
Members, next minute.
For her intervention. At present, there is a notable lack of support for bereaved parents, including bereavement midwives, as well as signposting to available and appropriate aftercare support. We do have bereavement midwives who are brilliant, but they're few and far between. And I can think of one in particular. She'll kill me for mentioning her, and here in my own constituency, Melissa Crockett, who has provided support for so many families over the years and strived to deliver better services in this area as well. Unfortunately, some parents feel that they have been left in limbo, struggling with their grief and silence with nowhere to turn. A report from the Baby Loss Awareness Alliance, Out of Sight, Out of Mind, found that 60% of bereaved parents felt they needed specialist psychological support, but were unable to access it. So bereavement care needs to be a component of the maternity strategy. It's clear that transformation in this area of health, as well as so many, is long overdue. Which does bring me to my next point. Given the gravity of the subject presented today, and the majority of actions I've alluded to in the motion fall under the responsibility of health, I'm struggling a wee bit to understand why the Finance Minister stands here today. Of course, we recognise the administrative role of the Department of Finance in issuing certificates, but this isn't, as Minister Archibald acknowledged herself in question time last week, something that she can do without the Department for Health. So it would stand to reason, in my view, to have Minister Swan answering today's motion, but getting this done is more important than getting credit for getting it done. A precedent has been set by England and Scotland in terms of recognising early baby loss. Parents here, families here, mustn't be left behind. Let's work to build a health service and a society where every family receives the compassion, the care, the support they deserve and need in their time of need.
Thank you. Sinead Ennis.
Pregnancy loss and baby loss is probably one of the most traumatic things that anybody can go through, and I want to pay a tribute to Kelly Armstrong for sharing her experience. I'm sure it's not easy to recall those experiences, and she put it more eloquently, I think, than any of us can do so. So I want to thank her for sharing her experiences with us. And anybody who's gone through a pregnancy will know the range of emotions that you experience. You know, you're excited, you're nervous, you're anxious. I think, but most of all, you just want to get through it. You want to get through it unscathed, and you just want to get to the point where you have that baby in your arms. And unfortunately for so many people, that just isn't the reality. So I think if we can do this small step, and I think it is a relatively small thing that we can do in terms of the administrative side of it, by issuing the baby loss certificates, then I think that is absolutely something that we should do. If that helps in any small way in terms of the healing process for those families and those parents, then it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. And I want to thank the Minister for Finance, as it does sit within her remit. I want to thank her for being so forthcoming in terms of her support for that aspect of it. But Cancor, I want to focus my remarks more so on the paediatric pathology element of this motion. And as I've said, the death of a child is agonising for parents and families. And for over 5 years, the North has been left with no practising paediatric pathology, forcing families to face further heartbreak by having to take their child to Liverpool Órlaithí for post-mortem services. And I suppose, just to give members a bit of background, I've been campaigning on this for a number of years, and I was first alerted to it back in 2017, 2018, when I assisted a family in my own constituency, actually in Warrenpoint. And I remember meeting with them and sitting with them in their living room while they recalled their experience of baby loss, and then subsequently been told, no, your child, you can't access the post-mortem services here. We don't have those services. Your child will have to travel to Liverpool. And they were just shook to their core to think that in the most traumatic thing that has happened to them, and all they wanted to do was be with that baby and bury that baby and come to terms with what had happened, that they were actually going to have to be separated from their baby, and it was actually going to have to travel to Liverpool. So that is something that they still have not got over. So I've been working with that family and a number of other families, because I think since 2018 there's been over 800 families that have been impacted by this, who have had to take a hospital post-mortem after the death of a child. So that's not an insignificant number. So in July 2023, I wrote to the Department for Health seeking an update on their work to recruit a paediatric pathologist, and I was disheartened to learn that the obstacles and pressures across these islands and globally actually still exist in regards to the perinatal and paediatric pathology services and recruitment. And I want to quote from the response that I received from the Department for Health, because I think it might be relevant to the amendment. So part of the response that I received stated that you will be aware that the restoration of a safe, robust and sustainable local service is made extra challenging by the need to recruit a team of paediatric pathologists simultaneously. Regrettably, despite significant efforts to recruit into this speciality, these difficulties remain. Therefore, it is increasingly unlikely that any further efforts by Belfast Trust to recruit into this speciality will be successful given the current overall UK position. The letter does go on to say that the Department remains committed to progressing work with the Department for Health in the South regarding the feasibility of an all-island approach in the longer term. So, Órlaithí, just to be clear, we are certainly not closing the door to any specialised services here in the North, but efforts to secure a paediatric pathologist service here haven't been successful, and with all the evidence suggesting that it is not unlikely to be successful in the short term, I think what we need to do is put the needs and the wishes of those families that are impacted first. And certainly my take from having met with families who've experienced this, they don't want to be separated from their child, and they can't understand why they can't access the services here on the island. Members may be aware that there were pre-COVID discussions, and I think it's been alluded to here as well during the discussion, with the Department for Health in the South, and the letter does go on to say that those discussions are ongoing and have resumed. So I think I do agree. I think that the Minister for Health, it would have been useful for him to be here, maybe to hear some of those, to hear that, maybe give us a personal update on that. So I think, just to conclude, Órlaithí, Sinn Féin have been working to see greater all-island cooperation with regard to the paediatric pathology services, so that parents can access these services on this island. This would ease the burden on families who are already experiencing trauma due to the death of a child from having to travel to England for a post-mortem. It's time to deliver post-mortem services on the island of Ireland for those parents and families who heartbreakingly must access them. That is what they deserve. So I would urge all members to support the motion. Thank you.
I call Cheryl Brownlee.
Speaker, firstly I want to say to Kelly, that must have been very difficult for yourself to share your story, and it really took me, so I'm thinking about you at this time. So I think it's great that we're actually able to bring this to the floor, and hopefully we can start to make some changes here within Northern Ireland. Miscarriage and other types of baby loss prior to 24 weeks in pregnancy are often minimised and treated as a clinical event rather than the loss of a baby. And sadly, the emotional impact of the loss is often disregarded for many. At all and any stage of pregnancy, your baby is important. It's a life from the moment you see those blue lines, and people must no longer grieve in silence. For many, the earliest of losses can be deeply distressing, both emotionally and physically. It means the loss not only of a pregnancy, but also of the hopes, the plans and the dreams that they had for this new life. And having no formal acknowledgement or marker of their loss can compound the grief. This new certificate scheme would make a genuine positive difference to many who have experienced pregnancy or baby loss, offering a formal recognition of the tiniest of lives. A number of years ago, I recall a constituent who had lost their baby. Their grief can't truly be explained in the comments here today, but through their grief, they felt totally and utterly unsupported. They were told the heartbreaking news and handed a leaflet. Yes, counselling was offered, but shockingly, this counselling service was actually offered in the hospital unit where this lady was told the heartbreaking news that she had lost her baby. I recall at the time writing to the Minister of Health for my predecessor, David Hilditch, highlighting this, and the service was moved but I am still totally shocked that this was even comprehended as acceptable. More recently, I was contacted again by a constituent who had felt the devastating loss of her baby. She was understandably upset that she could not access these baby loss certificate scheme, as it only applied in England. Whether you live in London, Lisburn, Carlisle or Carrickfergus, the loss of a baby will have the same devastating impact. Parents here in Northern Ireland should be afforded the same rights as those who live in England. Parents are not getting the support they need, and staff aren't able to provide the care they want to. But it's the very simple fact that those who are going through or have went through the loss of a baby need their voices heard, and they need to be supported with specialist support. Your grief is your own to share or store for whenever you're ready, but the introduction of this new scheme, hopefully, will offer a formal recognition of the tiniest of lives lost. Delivering this important service will highlight our continued commitment to deliver on the Women's Health Strategy and will be a very important step in supporting parents to provide that recognition. Thank you.
Call Nuala McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the members who have spoken so far on what is a sensitive but very important issue. I also want to pay tribute to my colleague Kelly Armstrong. It's not the first time that I have heard Kelly speaking out bravely about her own circumstances, but it's not always commonplace for everyone, and the bravery of every woman who chooses to speak out must be commended. But also, so as previous member Mark Durgan has said, those who do suffer alone and hide their grief onto themselves, deal with it in their own way, and whether we as legislators can actually help those people cope individually is really the matter of which we are here today. I thank everyone who has contributed already to the debate, specifically around the issue of those baby loss certificates. Everyone in the chamber will know someone personally who has lost that very much wanted and loved child. Whether it's at 12 weeks, 6 weeks, 21 or 22, the issue remains the same, that every one of those individuals mattered and were loved by the women who have lost them. I also today want to pay tribute to the caring midwives who do take such precious care of those families who have lost a baby. And this can take many forms. I know many midwives who have ensured where they can possible to get those little handprints, snippets of hair, or even just the gentle handling of the women who are currently or who are undergoing that loss. The care of which our medical practitioners, such as those midwives, take is much appreciated by every single woman who has undergone a miscarriage. However, the service is simply not adequate, and I want to touch on that today. We need to ensure that we fully invest in our perinatal mental health services for those who have lost either through pregnancy or at stillbirth. They need to ensure that from day one, right up until they are ready to leave that service, that they have the appropriate level for care. I want to focus now on the paediatric and perinatal pathology aspect of this motion. And as been mentioned previously, following the resignation in 2018, we have heard many times from the Health Minister, both before the collapse and after the collapse of the Assembly, with regards to the unsuccessful trawl of the reinstatement of those services. So I must ask today, though, what is then the plan? Is there any training opportunities? Is there a workforce plan regarding this particular service? Is there any scoping exercise currently being done or has been taken place before to see if people want to actually train and work within the pathology service here? And if not, why not? We will be supporting the amendment that is put before us, and we will also be supporting the original motion. But like many other people in the chamber, I would call on the Health Minister to perhaps answer this issue in more detail, perhaps through another statement, and how he can work in conjunction with the Minister of Finance, because, as others have said, this is not an issue that should be tackled through one department alone. And I look forward to perhaps hearing from the Health Minister, and no doubt his colleagues will express the sentiment of everyone in this room. But I do thank the members for bringing forward the motion and the amendment today, both of which we will be supporting. Thank you.
Danny Baker.
Traumatic experiences that a person can go through in their lifetime. Pregnancy should be a time of hope and joy for prospective parents, a time that should be exciting and filled with memories. Unfortunately for women that suffer miscarriage and baby loss, nothing could be further from the truth. The loss of a baby can have far-reaching impacts on the lives of not just the parents, but the wider family, and it is only right that this grief experienced by many within society should be acknowledged through the certificate scheme. Many of my family and friends have experienced pregnancy loss, stillbirth, miscarriage, and their babies passing away just days and weeks after birth. I know the love they have for their babies and think about them every day. It is truly heartbreaking, and life just isn't fair, but we can send a message today that we care. So I would ask everyone to please support this very important motion. Cormac.
Guy Middleton.
Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak today on this very important motion, and indeed pay tribute to all of the contributors who have already spoken, and to Kelly for her particularly important contribution, and indeed sharing with us as well in terms of her loss. Mr. Speaker, losing a baby at any stage during pregnancy or after is without doubt one of the most difficult experiences anyone can go through. The trauma and the grief and often unanswered questions is tragic for grieving mothers, fathers and their loved ones as well. Losing a baby has a profound and lasting impact on people's lives. We must act together to provide a method of recognising the life that existed and the loss of the precious life. For the many who have sadly had to experience the pain of losing their baby, the lack of a formal process to acknowledge the loss of life, the fact that their baby did exist, and the loss of their baby's life is incredibly significant. I speak this evening from personal experience, as my wife has experienced several baby losses prior to 24 weeks. The excitement that comes with pregnancy, the bonding and the planning, the life that exists within, and the terrible, painful, sudden and traumatic loss proves to make the grieving process all the harder. In our case, when medical professionals couldn't find an answer as to why, we of course were left with a very painful and private grief, with no formal way of acknowledging the loss due to not reaching certain date-based thresholds. The pain in these instances is much more than physical, and we know as a family unit that a formal certificate to mark our babies' lives would have helped profoundly in our journey. Members, baby loss certificates are a tangible and meaningful way for grieving parents and loved ones to recognise and grieve their profound loss. Such a certificate would serve as a reminder that they're not alone, that their baby's life did matter, and that their baby will never be forgotten. It is important to pay tribute to the many groups and charities and individuals who over the years have worked tirelessly to provide support to bereaved families. Such organisations are strong advocates for the many babies who have sadly passed away, unaccounted for in death registers, but forever loved and missed in their parents' lives. Within my own constituency, I specifically want to mention Julianne and all those at Life After Loss who provide much-needed support, comfort and friendship to the many families who have sadly lost their babies during pregnancy. Julianne, like many other women, has her own story of loss, which she has bravely shared, and for years she has used her story as a motivation to help others. Julianne recognises the difference a baby loss certificate would have made to her own journey, and is actively and passionately advocating for this to be formalised. The introduction of certificates may seem like a small step forward. However, this would be a powerful, compassionate and empathetic way of supporting the many families in all of our constituencies who face tremendous loss. There are, of course, Mr. Speaker, wider challenges in terms of stigma around openly talking about pregnancy loss and the feelings of isolation and, for some, self-blame. I believe that we as public representatives have the power to encourage change, to talk about our own journeys and to open the doors to those who have their own experiences of loss. And of course, every story is unique and deeply personal, and we must listen to those who have walked this journey in order to provide better and much more compassionate help. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I call Linda Dillon.
I want to begin, like others, to thank Kelly for her sharing her very personal story of the loss of her babies. And like others, I would like to say to all of the families who have suffered the loss of a child or children that we are thinking of them today during this debate. Over the past week, I've spoken to numerous people who have reached out to talk to me about the need for a baby loss certificate. And I'm pleased to hear during this debate that there is a large degree of consensus, and I hope that that will mean that the Finance Minister will be able to implement this sooner rather than later. And I want to thank the Minister for her positive response during question time last week on a question in relation to the baby loss certificates. There are no words that can describe how much it will mean to parents and families who have suffered the loss to have the official recognition of their loss and to have official acknowledgement that this child existed and was and is part of their family. It is important to recognise that many organisations and families themselves have found ways to acknowledge and remember their child. And I want to mention specifically the Remember Me registry. And one of the babies on that registry is baby Peter Carberry from Coal Island, the firstborn son of Shauna and Tony Carberry. And because they lost him pre-24 weeks, there was no birth or death certificate, and they had to ask for the remains of their precious son to be returned to them for burial, something that should just naturally happen where there are remains. This happened 23 years ago, but he was and is very much part of their family and will never be forgotten. The Remember Me registry has a Little Angels page that provide a memorial space for these babies and a baby loss certificate and QR code for their memorial place if they have one, and it is providing comfort in the absence of anything else. When Shauna was pregnant with her last son, she went into preterm labour and had a meeting at her bedside to advise her and Tony that if labour continued that day and the baby was born before midnight, it's a miscarriage. Nothing. If born after midnight, birth and death would be registered. It was the most horrible night and will never be forgotten. Thankfully, Ross did survive, and I know him, and he's now a beautiful, healthy 15-year-old boy. And to think, had he not gotten through that day, that there would never be any official record that he ever existed. So I believe, and I hope that everybody here will support this, that everyone who wishes to should have the opportunity to have a baby loss certificate. This should be a straightforward application process for all of those who want it. In relation to the paediatric pathology, I will just say this: I do think it is important that we have a service on this island so that families do not have to put their baby on a plane to go to England. I think it's really important. We lost members of our family, and thankfully, not to say that you would say thankfully, but it was many years ago, and we did have paediatric pathology here. I can't imagine if they had had to put their baby on a plane and send it to England, how they would have felt. You know, so I think it is really important that somehow we find a way to have that service on this island for the families who need it, because it would be unbearable to have to put your child on a plane whenever all you want to do is take them home and bury them.
Colin McGrath.
Mr. Speaker, and this is not an easy motion to speak on. It deals with deeply emotive subjects that can be incredibly traumatising for women and families, and it's focused on the loss of life, the loss of the most innocent of lives. And I believe that all of us right across this House only want the best for our families and children. And while many of us differ in this place, often quite heatedly at times, in terms of policy, we can recognise our shared humanity and share our own human stories. And in terms of this motion, I'm incredibly grateful and thankful to Kelly and Gary and to others telling their story. I think that it enriches this discussion that we're having here today, and it helps us to understand exactly that it is that we are discussing. And it is that sense of shared humanity that we are discussing today. That must be our starting point. And I think that if that is the starting point, then I think any policy or any changes to policy that take place that follow, then it will be coming from the right place. In our present state, parents who lose a baby, which I do appreciate is not, or it is imperfect language, during pregnancy must travel to England for the child's post-mortem. And whilst I appreciate that the HSC will pay for the travel and accommodation and that staff will help and will provide care, dignity and compassion throughout the time, it does feel unfair to me that we aren't able to provide that service here. It is regrettable that we are in a position here where we have tried to restore our regional paediatric pathology service, but despite repeated attempts it has just failed. And it's also regrettable, Speaker, that despite attempts by the Health and Social Care Board in the past to approach providers in the south, that no provider could be found that would be able to provide that service for those from the north. All of us want the best for our families and children. One of the singular things that we could do for them, should they choose, is to provide that certificate in their baby's memory, to recognise that they had a life, to recognise that they were loved by someone and that they were part of a family. And I have seen that love and that sense of family at events that I've attended, annual events that are organised by SANS within the constituency, and I've been able to join parents and share a moment with them. But it's only a moment for me with them. It's their life that they're living day and daily, and to have some sort of recognition, I think, in the form of certificates would be very much welcome, and therefore for those reasons we at the SDLP are happy to support the motion and the amendment. There is clearly work that we should be doing here, and it should be our priority to provide that service for families and children here. Thank you.
I call the Minister of Finance, Ciamh Archibald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to speak on this motion and on the development of a baby loss certificate scheme for parents who have lost a baby during pregnancy before 24 weeks. At the outset, I want to pay tribute to those women and parents who have gone through the heartache of losing a baby during pregnancy, for shining a light on this issue and for sharing their own stories publicly to encourage change. I know that is not easy. The loss of a baby is a tragic thing for any family to experience, and it's also very personal. To share that experience publicly in order to campaign for change takes a lot of courage and a lot of selflessness. I want to thank all those parents, including those in this chamber, the health professionals and organisations who support those who have suffered loss, who have got in touch and shared their stories with me and colleagues in advance of this debate today. I believe we should do everything in our power to support those who have had to endure the pain of losing a baby. Although this motion is broadly framed, and while the health matters referred to in the motion are obviously important, the focus of my response is on the registration and certification of life events, which is a core function of my department. Many of us will have first-hand experience of the registration service at both the happiest and saddest times of our lives. I feel strongly their work should be extended to include a baby loss certificate scheme. As you will be aware, under current legislation, the death of a baby is only officially recognised if it occurs after the 24th week of pregnancy. In these awful circumstances, the death is recognised as a stillbirth. The parents of a stillborn child can register the stillbirth of their baby and obtain a certificate which recognises their baby's existence. In my view, it is important the same recognition should be afforded to parents who have lost a baby prior to 24 weeks. While many early pregnancy losses go unreported, it's estimated, as others have said, that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss during pregnancy or birth. Baby loss clearly touches many families across our community. It impacts on people from many different walks of life and backgrounds. It unites people from across our society in a shared suffering, which is all too often borne in silence. A certificate will not reverse or undo the pain which baby loss inflicts on women and families, but the introduction of a voluntary baby loss certificate scheme may in some way help parents to process their loss. The scheme would give bereaved families the opportunity to have formal recognition of their loss. It could help many of them to recognise that the suffering they feel is valid, that their experience is common, more common than it ought to be, and that its impact is real. and it could help to start conversations with family members and friends, bringing this experience into the light, making it part of the family's story and helping with the grieving process. It is my expectation that a baby loss scheme would be voluntary, and there would of course be no pressure on parents to use the service. It is my hope that this would give families the same benefits as have been experienced where it has been introduced, and that it would help those families who choose to avail of it. In taking forward this scheme, it is important that we will work quickly and efficiently. In correspondence this week, the Health Minister and I have both affirmed our commitment to work across government on these proposals. The Department of Health is engaging with their counterparts in England as the new system there is embedded. In parallel, I have asked my officials to work with those in the Department of Health to consider how a scheme of this kind can be implemented here, with the aim of providing the best possible outcome for bereaved parents who wish to have their baby loss formally recognised, and I want to see this progressed as quickly as possible. I would like to thank the proposers of the motion and all those who have made important contributions to today's debate. It will help to shape the development of the scheme going forward.
I call Diane Dodds to wind.
Mr. Speaker, in addressing the motion and the amendment today and in winding up on this, I not only just want to acknowledge the importance of the issue, but to agree with our colleague Mark Durkin, where he indicated these are really two separate issues. And perhaps it would have been better had we dealt with them separately, and therefore the Health Minister could have been here to deal with the issue of the lack of a paediatric pathology service in Northern Ireland. But we are where we are, and we will be supporting the motion, and obviously we'll be supporting the amendment. These are very emotional and difficult issues, and I think we should acknowledge and thank the Chair of the Health Committee, Liz Kimmins, for bringing forward the stories of so many people who had contacted her. And one of the things that I think that we have all agreed in this chamber is that we must do better to support those who are affected by early baby loss. We all know that when we hear of a pregnancy, that is the start of hopes, dreams, and all of the issues that are so important. But we have also heard in this debate today that in the United Kingdom, an estimated 25,000 pregnancies end through miscarriage. And it is the most common complication in pregnancy. So this is a really significant issue that we do have to deal with. And so therefore, a certification for those who have had a miscarriage or lost a baby through an ectopic pregnancy prior to 24 weeks is a small but important acknowledgement of that child's life. And I think we've all agreed on this today as well, a certificate is really not enough. And we must look at how clinicians support mothers and parents. I've heard the loss of a baby through miscarriage be referred to as a clinical episode, or something that's very cold and so on. And we really must get away from language that takes away from that loss. And I do think that this will require, there's some absolutely brilliant examples of training with midwives and so on. But I do think it will require more training, more knowledge and so on in order to make this a better process for everyone. And that we should look at not just simply the baby loss certificate, which is important in itself, but also the training that we give and how we address the issue with parents. As our colleague Cheryl Brownlee indicated, to just simply be sent home from hospital with a leaflet is a fairly brutal experience for new parents. The second part of the motion around the lack of a child pathology service, I think we all agree in this chamber, and I won't labour the point, that as Robbie Butler said, it is actually cruel to actually not have this service within Northern Ireland, or at least access it on a wider all-island basis. I do think that's important. I think it's something that we should be working towards, and something that is important if we see ourselves as a compassionate society to actually do. I do think that a failure to address these issues. There are many huge issues that this Assembly must address. We must have a budget, we must have a programme for government, we must have all of these things. But sometimes it's the simple things that actually make a difference, and that is very important. So I want us to ensure that we look at all options to ensure that this issue is resolved. It has gone on for 5-6 years. And really that is far too long for this to have persisted. And perhaps it would be good to hear from the Health Minister on the issue. Can I just say in closing, to thank you for Kelly for sharing your story. But you do make a massively important point about the cut-off date. And I hope that the Finance Minister picks up that point in developing the scheme. Thank you.
I call Órlaithí Flynn.
And so I just want to start off by sincerely thanking every member who has spoken on the debate this evening. And it's been said a few times, but it really doesn't get more personal than this when people in the chamber are choosing to share their own wee bits of personal recollections and accounts if they've been through the experience of baby loss. So it is an emotional debate for many members in this chamber, and I think then, as Diane was saying there, that's reflective of how emotional and how personal and how real this is for all of our constituents, for all of the people that we represent, because we're obviously reflective of the communities that we come from. So, you know, even if you're just looking across the chamber how the debate has went this evening, you know that, you know, it's reflective of how people are feeling in terms of these issues within their own homes. And sadly, many people have been through this, and we'll all know if we haven't been through it ourselves. I'm sure our family members have, our friends have, our relatives. So I think we all get the importance of it and the emotion around it. And I think that, again, for an issue that clearly has been felt by so many people, going back historically, it obviously has been overlooked for a really long time. So I think it's a brilliant initiative that if we can bring this forward in terms of the certificates that are going to acknowledge that loss of a wee baby before the 24-week period. But then it's also been highlighted from some of the groups around, you know, the certificates is sort of, you know, they're one option of, you know, trying to help support people in terms of baby loss, but then there's other issues around the support services and around the education and awareness of the issues. And again, I have no doubt that it has been particularly difficult for the members in the chamber that spoke about their own personal stories. I know that Kelly had spoke to me, one of the first conversations that me and Kelly had up in Stormont. It was before I had even started my IVF, and I still to this day appreciate Kelly's openness and kindness when she was speaking about her own experience. And, you know, even when Gary was speaking about his and some of the language that he was using around how you start bonding with a baby in early pregnancy, you know, and all that self-blame, no matter how soon or how late you lose a baby in pregnancy, you still go through all the emotions and all them feelings. And I have spoke previously about my own experience. The Assembly wasn't sitting at the time, but I did fall pregnant. My first round of IVF, we fell pregnant, and now I lost the pregnancy very early on. I was only 8 weeks pregnant, but even still, that was 8 weeks still of love, happiness, joy. But so I do think that it's important, although it can be really hard to speak publicly. I was terrified the first time that I done it, and I wasn't even planning on doing it. but I'd done it sort of with a wee bit of determination in the back of my head, thinking if it helps someone else, do you know. So, and there is loads of stigma around the issue still, so it's like when you can speak up, try and do it, because I think that helps. But I do hope that today's debate has given some comfort to the many families who have obviously been going through this trauma of baby loss and sadly will continue to go through it. And again, very, very conscious that every single journey is different. You know, the loss of every baby and every pregnancy, circumstances are different, timing's different, everything about it's different. So hopefully no one feels, you know, offended or whatever, you know, depending on what their own circumstances were. But the point is that for people that have went through baby loss, it's all out of love and it's all out of joy, and we're just trying to, hopefully with today's motion, bring that support and bring that comfort through the certificates. And then just on the point around, obviously, the post-mortems, like that is a huge, huge additional pain and trauma of not having access to them services here in the north or here across the island. And I just can't even, my brain cannot even imagine what a family goes through, you know, first of all, you know, losing their wee baby and then not having access to a post-mortem. I can't even imagine. So I think that the reinstatement, I know it's separate to obviously the Minister of Finance, and it's an issue that, well, judging by tonight's debate, I'm sure that all members across the chamber would like to pick this up and see how we can support the Department of Health to maybe bring something forward. But I think Mark had said it was unacceptable, the delays in not having this service. Sinead had quoted 800 babies or families since 2018. Like, it really isn't good enough. So I know that, again, it's outside of Kiva's remit, but I think that following today's debate, if we can get the certificates over the line, then brilliant. But if we can come together to really try and make progress on that pathology service, that will really, really make a massive, massive difference to families who are going through the most unimaginable pain and trauma, that are having to travel in those circumstances. In the case that Linda mentioned, where the family couldn't even travel, was separated from their wee baby. It's just terrible. So, again, just to conclude, I'm sorry that I didn't take notes on when everybody was speaking. I was listening to you all. But obviously, you know, Kelly's remarks, sharing her experience, so powerful. Gary's stuff really hit home with me too, Gary. So thank you for that. And then the personal accounts that Liz shared, that Linda shared. Mark had spoke about the bereavement counsellor and his constituency and all the great work that they're doing. CAR's intervention, actually, even around those bereavement services. And then I know Diane had touched on that as well, around even around, you know, the training with clinicians and the language that they're using. Because we've all said it, it doesn't get any more emotive, it doesn't get any more personal than this. So anything, any good that we can do coming out of today's motion, then let's do it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, and to all the members that have spoken. The question is that the amendment standing in the name of Diane Dodds and Alan Robinson be made. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, if any, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is the motion as amended be agreed. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, if any, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. The Assembly is adjourned.